A couple weeks ago marked the Jewish holiday of Passover, Pesach, marking the Exodus from Egypt. Following Passover is 49 days. 49 days known as the Omer, of waiting and counting until Shavuot, Pentecost, when Moses went up to Sinai and received the Torah, the holy book from God. 49 days of waiting and counting and considering our actions, who we are, what we do for our community. Forgive me, but tomorrow I have a calculus exam. And I have some of these thoughts rattling around in my brain. And there's the notion of when you're looking at horizontal asymptotes, you can't always find what exactly they'll do at any given moment, but you can predict their end behavior. I love this notion because I like to apply it to social justice and politics. You see, at any given moment, there can be turbulent times, more peaceful ones. There can be times of great social liberalism and progressivism, those of reactionary conservatism, and somewhere in between. But at the end of the day, as time approaches infinity, I'd like to hope that the arc of time, as Dr. King said, bends towards love and justice. And so in January, one day, I'd had enough. The swastika scrawled on a bathroom stall in my high school was the straw that broke the camel's back. After experiencing and witnessing a year and a half of anti-Semitism in my school, I went to Facebook to post a testimonial. I was tired of being called a Christ killer, being subjected to Jewish jokes, derided for the greed of my people, mocked for the size of my nose, and receiving swastikas. I was, above all else, being tired of being told that anti-Semitism was no longer a problem by the very same people who perpetrated these actions, because they were just joking around and having fun. And perhaps that's why I find it so distressing that the first question I was asked by my administrators when I went public was, who did this? These actions were rooted in ignorance, not in malice. What was sorely needed was a dialogue, an open discussion, not penal measures. Many of these people were, and still are, my dearest friends, my peers. And I shared my experience in an effort to catalyze the conversation, not to punish any given person or make them feel better. The question that I was asked by my administrators is emblematic of a larger issue that we face, the gap that exists, the empathy gap that exists between students and adults, who often see school in radically different lights. As we gather here today, we affirm that the student experience is important for gaining a more whole and complete pictures of both our school and society at large. When we consider the great social issues of our time, the political ramifications and their history, it's important that we don't ever lose sight of the narrative, of the actual human experience, because nothing does that better than the person, than the personal story. Data and surveys do not give us a complete picture. What makes America great are stories like that of my grandparents. The tale of a New Jersey-born Jew and an Indian Hindu immigrant meeting in the 1960s and getting married, and then proceeding to get divorced. But regardless, what makes America great is the story of Sahar's father, trekking from Iran to America after the revolution, and the contribution of immigrants from all walks of life to this country. What makes America great is the passion, and the vigor that Leanne shares when she details and fights against the institutionalized racism in our school system. You see, the reality is that students don't just experience school climate, we create it. Students don't just witness the political fighting, the language of hate or derision, we experience it. We all experience it, we all internalize it. As a Jewish American, I can personally attest to the fact that with increasing visibility and the seeming acceptability of the voices of neo-Nazis, of anti-Semites, of racists and bigots, and it concerns me. It should concern us all, not just when it's that of ourselves, but that of others. Jews must be concerned with racism. Muslims must be concerned with homophobia. Intersectionality makes it clear that when one of us is attacked, we are all attacked as well. Organizations across the country have seen an uptick against the crimes against people of color, of Mexicans and immigrants at large, against Muslims and Jews, gays and lesbians, against members of the transgender community. When are we going to say enough is enough? The response that is needed is a culture of empathy, not punishment. A recognition of our shared struggles, of the intersectionality and the pain that we experience is needed. Now is a time to unite. A time to unite as a community. Unite as brothers and sisters and as peers. In our hopes and not our fears. In our love and not our hate. And in our shared vision of a better world. The issues that we face are much larger than one person or one movement, a single political climate. We must be careful to love those whom we disagree with, for it is most challenging. In Deuteronomy, Moses reminds the Israelites to not despise an Edomite because he is your brother. Do not despise the Egyptian because you were a stranger in his land. Just because we disagree with someone, just because they spew things that we disagree, does not make them any less human. They deserve the same respect and empathy that we demand for ourselves. Perhaps that was why I was pleasantly surprised when I was contacted by the local newspaper and TV stations, many of my teachers and peers, because they all assured me that they wanted to make a change. Now is that time in our community. Rabbi Hillel asked, if not now when, and if not me then who? It is in that same spirit that I invite my dear friend Leanne to continue the conversation.
About my experience as a person of mixed race in the accelerated cluster on that note. So in the 3rd grade, I was accepted into the accelerated cluster at an elementary school on the other side of town, one that was not especially diverse, with a primarily white student body. This was extremely different from the previous elementary school I attended, where the student population was primarily minority. Here in the 4th grade, I had my first realization that people could relate skin color to character. I noticed that the other kids in my program, the ones in band, orchestra, and academic team, were for the most part Asian and white, while the general students, whom my peers largely looked down upon because they weren't as involved in these perceivably prestigious programs, were largely black and Latino. There were only a couple other black students in the program, and I don't remember anyone Latino. Darker skin, in my impressionable young mind, became related to lower intelligence and less accomplishment. Even so, I always found myself being jealous of these general students. Not because they were part of special programs, but because they seemed like they belonged, something that I never truly felt in the cluster. The general students had peers and teachers who looked like me, who I could relate to, and I wanted that. I was one of only 3 black students in my grade. Even as a 4th and 5th grader, I felt disenfranchised by the harsh race distinctions in the school and in the program. I found it hard to trust my teachers like the other students did, not because my teachers treated me differently than the other students, but because of the racial barrier that I felt between my peers and my teachers and myself. Not only did I feel like I didn't belong in the cluster, I felt like I was lower than the other students because I had darker skin. My first 3 years in the accelerated cluster were rough. I had to learn to relate to students and teachers that I had little in common with, other than measured intelligence, and to adjust to actually being challenged by curriculum. The middle school I attended was a different story from elementary. The student body was, again, largely Latino and African American, but this time I experienced this diversity in an entirely different way. The kids in the program had their own area of the school in which we stayed for the entire day, aside from 2 hours of exploratory classes. The other students, who were districted to the school, had their own areas. The district surrounding this Title I school was primarily underprivileged and had high crime rates, yielding a student population with many behavioral problems and a culture that was vastly different from that of the cluster. Again, I was one of only a few African American students in the program. Other students would often call me an Oreo because I was black on the outside and white on the inside. I guess being well-educated makes you white. The identity that I formed was complicated. I was obviously black or half black, but I wasn't black. The black kids were like the general students who were rowdy, got into fights, listened to rap music, and didn't excel in school. I definitely wasn't that, but I wasn't white either, as evidenced by the expectation that I knew about black things like popular rap music and fried chicken. The nuanced challenges of being mixed race only perpetuated my feelings of alienation. Most of the students in my program considered the general students to be of lower worth and wouldn't be caught dead socializing with them. Despite this, at times I felt that I identified more with the general students than the students in the program. Again, all of my teachers were white, and the general students had teachers that were diverse in race. I remember thinking how cool those teachers seemed and how they seemed to care about students that no one else did. I can't think of a teacher that I thought cared about me in middle school. They seemed to be completely oblivious to the racial distinctions in our school and never once expressed an understanding of how it felt to be in my position or what challenges I faced because of my skin tone, which irreversibly connected me with the general students that they themselves looked down upon. Every assignment seemed to be a challenge to my capability, an obstacle meant to prove I didn't belong in the cluster, but rather in the general classes with the other African American students. To this day, I've never had a teacher who wasn't white in any class other than Chinese, which has been taught by a Chinese woman since I started in 4th grade. The mistrust that I feel for teachers has lessened over the years as I have become more aware of the origin of my feelings, but is not completely eradicated. And although I have been able to do well in school, I feel that a lack of identification with my teachers has had a significant impact on my quality of education. I've witnessed many of my friends grow in strong relationships with teachers over the years and using these relationships to get exceptions from assignments, help with concepts, recommendations, and just general support in classes. A few teachers have asked me why I didn't just come talk to them about something or tell them what was going on before the situation affected my grade or before I got too behind. I always respond with, I don't know, but the truth is that I did know. I didn't say anything because I did not think they would care. I didn't trust them enough. In a school system that is sorely lacking in teacher diversity and conversation about minority experience, I owe my success to a strong support at home and a few role models who have believed in my ability to succeed. Without these privileges, which many students do not have, I don't know how or if I would have come this far. On that note, I'd like to invite my friend Sahar to continue.
It is most definitely not an easy task to speak after those 2 eloquent speakers who I've had the honor of knowing these last few years. Especially, I'd like to thank Zach for introducing me to this opportunity, which I am greatly relishing the opportunity to speak to you. Like any great speaker, I'd like to open up with a brief narrative of how I came to be here. See, my parents came home from their first parent-teacher conference extremely anxious. My preschool teacher had convinced them that I was mute. And if any of you know me, I'm anything but mute. My mother mumbled, "I don't understand, she speaks so much at home," and my teacher responded with, "Yes, but does it convey meaning? She's exhibiting symptoms of schizophrenia, mumbling to herself, muttering meaningless rhymes, and lacking in social development." This assumption plagued my mother. It lacked any correlation with the girl that she had come to know so well. By 6 months, I had learned to speak my mother tongue of Farsi, or Persian. By the age of 1, I was reading the childhood stories that she grew up with in the Iranian Revolution. By the age of 2, I spoke Spanish fluently with my neighbors, and by the age of 3, I was mute. The situation was so devoid of consistency that my mother had to observe the scene for herself. The next day, she walked into class, and I was right behind her with my little arms, grasping her shins tightly. Through the eyes of my teacher, the day that ensued failed to be anomalous, but for the first time in months, I was understood. The mumbles were not incoherent chatter. Mother recognized them as words. It was a random mixture of French and Spanish and Farsi, but there were words nonetheless. My teacher had diagnosed my use of language as a disability. Simply because we fail to comprehend other voices does not mean that they're not valid. Lack of cultural empathy is not rooted in hatred or prejudice, but rather a failure to communicate. A day after my mother was informed of this instance, my teacher came back to school with the Spanish to English dictionary, and for the first time had a conversation with me after 4 months of being in her preschool class. The acquisition of language is inherently accompanied by an appreciation and a respect for the native culture that could never be provided by the restraints of a single tongue. Many American high schoolers grow up these days believing that learning dialects and memorizing their beautifully articulated verb conjugations is a chore. They have a strong sense of self-identity that focuses on their language and their culture being in the right. But here's where the issue arises. According to the latest poll of American citizens by the New York Times, 75% of us are unable to hold a conversation in a foreign language. Now, this may be a little troublesome here in the United States because we live in a cosmopolitan nation in which the minority is becoming the majority. We lack understanding, accuracy, and respect because we lack communication. In point of fact, there has been some emphasis placed on languages, especially Spanish and French when it comes to learning in schools. New policies have been added in order to make sure that these languages aren't a requirement for a graduation. But do you see the discontinuity? Just look a little bit closer. Every single language that we teach in schools has the same alphabet as English. What about Arabic? What about Chinese, Japanese, Mandarin? Their dialect is different. Their religion is different. The fundamental building blocks of their communication is different. So why even bother sympathizing, right? They don't do anything like us. They can't possibly be like us. This lack of understanding and communication has seeped its way into deeper rooting, surpassing the shallow interpretations of like-minded individuals and gaining momentum into the global press. It's become impossible in me to watch the news without feeling victimized by ad hominem attacks and sweeping generalizations. My father and I have developed a morning tradition, and it evolved ever since I entered kindergarten. Without fault or hesitation, we would settle into ourselves in the car amidst the pitch-black moments before dawn as we drove towards school. And without even thinking twice about it, I turn on the radio onto 98.9 NPR's Morning Report. I relished the opportunity to explore the vast worlds that exceeded the limits of my 4-year-old imagination. I savored the power in knowing the intricacies of foreign societies. And this simple podcast became the highlight of my childhood. That was until the country from which my parents immigrated from became the topic on the news. I remember screaming in the car, it's pronounced Iran, not Iran. My country's name is not a simple sentence made up of a subject, I, and a verb, ran. The implemented Iranian theocracy does not represent the political beliefs of Middle Easterners. Our individual backgrounds cannot be painted with the single sweep of your brush. And every single time I lashed out in frustration in my car, my father said, Sahab, don't strain yourself. They can't hear you from the car. To me, a young Iranian-American Muslim, the consequences of this inaccurate speech are blatantly evident and should be screamed at every corner of the earth. I cannot tell you how many times I was asked if I had a bomb in my backpack when I walked to school. I can't tell you how many times people assume that no Muslims or Arabs or Middle Easterners were hurt in the atrocious attacks of 9/11. They cannot imagine how much we were hurt as well. I cannot tell you how many times I was asked if my father was a terrorist. I can't tell you how many times I was asked to rot in hell. And I cannot tell you how many times people assume that they knew me. Assume that I represented a people and that people represented a religion and that religion was as easy as words on a page or a flag that can be waved. But entire cultures aren't that simple. Every single population has its outliers, and we Muslims did not villainify this amazing nation that I'm honored to be a part of. Lazy journalism villainified us. Now, I receive phone calls. I hear stories of my friends living in New York City forced to disrobe their hijabs because they fear for their safety to go to school in the New York streets, as violent riots upsurge a couple streets down. The social contract is in jeopardy, and it's obvious why. I receive phone calls from my grandparents, aunts, and cousins asking, are you okay? They wonder what will happen to the trade sanctions. They inquire what's to become of the Iran nuclear deal. They want to know when I'm coming back. And I just wish I could answer their queries. It's a little funny. My father has been here for 18 years. He's been here since he was 18 years old. And he likes to say that he fixes broken parts for a living. He's a cardiothoracic surgeon, and he spends hours devoting his time to his community. I cannot tell you how many times he has had more than 4 or 5 surgeries a day. And there have been nights where he doesn't come home for 3 days because he's in the hospital taking cases that the other doctors won't. It's kind of ironic how he's here fixing the broken parts of this community when his heart is broken and his family is across seas. The movement for political correctness is more than a plea to cease name-calling and mudslinging. It's a demand for cultural respect and acceptance in a nation that seems to have forgotten the very fundamentals of our First Amendment rights. But how do we make such a dramatic leap? Where do we even start to mend the wounds that have penetrated the flesh and has shown no signs of healing over the last few decades? We must understand. And to understand, we must communicate, and to communicate, we must speak. To bridge the gap between cultures that have been painted as mutually exclusive, to resolve the undeserving blame of innocent individuals, and to heal prominent discriminatory issues, we must connect with individuals of different backgrounds. A prominent Muslim American figure, Reza Aslan, spoke at a TED Talk recently in San Francisco, and in it he said that there was a national poll that surveyed individuals that didn't know a single Muslim American. 80% of them had a negative view towards Islam. Then they asked a group of people that only knew one Muslim. Just one. And the negativity factor was cut in half. Education doesn't change minds, statistics doesn't change minds, relationships change people's minds. I'm hoping that by speaking to you today, we can establish a relationship, establish a connection to see that we are all one people, that despite our different religions, we all preach love and kindness and acceptance. Do not be fooled by the disarming tricks played by interpretations and promoters of inequality. Remember that communication links to understanding and that humanity is our universal.